The secret world is full of stories, birth and death on a multi-universal, extra-dimensional scale. So sit back, grab an energy drink, and witness Solomon Island. Located in the New England state of Maine, Solomon Island has a rich history dating back almost 2,000 years. Originally inhabited by the native tribes of the Wabanaki, the island was considered a resting place for a powerful, other-dimensional deity, the Third Age Dreamer, for which the Wabanaki acted as caretakers and guardians. The Dreamer is one of many known as the Eaters of Stars, and kept contained in their slumber by Gaia. However, they are aware of their dream prison and actively seek to awaken. The Dreamers are thought to maintain reality in slumber, with the end of their dream marking the possible end of reality. The Wabanaki aided Gaia in trying to prevent this. However, their efforts would not go unchallenged. Solomon Island soon found itself besieged by Mayans. The Mayans were devoted followers of a religion that worshipped the Dreamers as gods and paid homage in the erection of a sun-based cult, the Black Sun. These worshippers brought with them monstrous warrior servants, the insectoid hybrid, the winged Akab. Using these creatures, they launched an attack on the Wabanaki and initiated what would come to be known as the Darkness War. The Mayans intended to wake the Dreamer, the one they called the Sleeping Snake under the Mountain. They were almost successful, but for an intervention. Around this time, the Vikings settled in northern Europe received a premonition from Odin. They saw the battle that would rage on the island and the importance of preventing the Dreamer from waking. They immediately set sail. Along the way, the Vikings pillaged a monastery near the Scottish coast. There, they seized an artifact kept by the Templars and known to have the ability to harness the power of the sun, the Sword of Excalibur. When at last they came to sight the island, a thick, otherworldly fog was spotted to be following after their ships. They were able to use Excalibur's power to drive the fog back and push through. With the help of the Vikings and the sword, the Wabanaki defeated the Mayan invaders and ended the war. The dream remained intact. With their masters gone, the remaining Akab were slain. Only 3 of the creatures survived, queens of the brood that dug themselves deep into the earth of Solomon Island and went dormant. Months later, the fog that had followed the Vikings on the water arrived on the island. Banding together once more, the Vikings and Wabanaki performed a ritual that confined the fog inside the Sword of Excalibur. To further strengthen the island against danger, rune stones were erected around the island to protect it. The Vikings remained on Solomon Island for another year before deciding to return home. They took Excalibur with them, as it was the only thing capable of unlocking the protective seals they'd placed. Unfortunately, their return did not go as planned. Somewhere along the journey, the sword was lost, and the Vikings found themselves trapped in the fog. With no defense, a corruption invaded their bodies with alien sickness. Those who managed to return to their coastal villages soon spread that sickness. The infected became entranced by a strange song that drove them into the water. Weeks later, outsiders would find the villages abandoned. Deep in the sea, the Vikings underwent eldritch change. Their flesh sloughed from their bone and made way for forms more natural to the briny deep. Their former identities were lost as they were born into a new state of living death. They became the Draug and vanished into ghost stories for years to come. For the next 600 years, Solomon Island lived on. The Illuminati first set foot on its soil in 1666, with the coming of 2 senior members of the faction. The Illuminati had suffered defeat at the hands of the Templars in Europe, and looked to build an illuminated empire in the New World. For the next century, the English settlers would appropriate the native lands of the Wabanaki, nearly driving them to extinction. By the late 1700s, Solomon Island belonged to the Illuminati. It was divided into several areas. These included the town of Kingsmouth, the Savage Coast, and Blue Mountain. Development in the coming years would see the construction of numerous modern landmarks, among them Innsmouth Academy, Devore Manor, the Blue Ridge Mine, and Atlantic Island Park. The desecration of the island enraged the Wabanaki and led to several displays of rebellion. After some hostility, the U.S. government finally declared Blue Mountain the property of the Wabanaki, and the tribe was able to reclaim the sacred site where the dreamer slumbered. However, the Wabanaki were in decline. Each new generation believed less in the stories of their forefathers. The decision was made to modernize with the construction of a casino. To finance the project, the Wabanaki sold parts of their land to the Orochi, an as of yet mysterious outside faction interested in amassing power and building a strong base around Kingsmouth. The decision to sell dealt a heavy blow, and the Wabanaki disbanded. The seals that kept Solomon Island safe began to weaken. With the protection of the island at a low and its guardians fractured, the fog finally found a return. In 2011, a fishing boat known as the Lady Margaret became caught in a sudden storm off the coast of the island. The crew found themselves trapped in the fog for several days, unable to navigate a passage home as their equipment failed. Eventually, they came upon a ship graveyard. There, a strange red algae grew on every surface and seemed the source of the fog. The crew soon noticed a shine coming from the water. An enticing song led them to retrieve an object from the depths, the sword of Excalibur. As soon as the sword found its way on board, the equipment began to function, and Lady Margaret was able to navigate a return back to Solomon Island. Only 4 crew members managed to return alive. The remaining survivors had lost their minds to varying degree, suffering from symptoms akin to dementia. Excalibur was recovered by the Illuminati and moved to Innsmouth Academy for study. Weeks later, the fog drifted from the sea to shore, blanketing the island for 30 minutes. Once more, the enchanting song from the sea began to pull at those affected by the fog. Most of the inhabitants of Solomon Island walked into the sea. Only a handful survived, those unable to walk of their own accord or unable to hear the song. The next day, the inhabitants of Solomon Island returned to shore, but they were no longer the people they'd once been. Their bodies caught in a mindless state of living death, walking corpses descended on the survivors left on the island. Past tragedies had also left several mass graves littering the island, out of which poured more living corpses to add to the number. Following closely behind came the Drog, spreading themselves along the seashore as they began to reproduce. A day later, the entire island was overrun. The survivors splintered and holed up in various locations. While the fog brought the living dead and Drog, filth also began an aggressive spread. It found passage to Solomon Island through the Dreamer, whose struggle to wake had torn holes into the fabric of reality. The filth seeped through the tears. The Orochi had also found a source deep in the Blue Mountain mine, and had been conducting experiments on the living disease for some years. The infectious nature of filth seeped into the land and life forms of Solomon Island. It drove man, monster, and beast alike insane, eating at the mind until the victim joined the hive mind disease and worked only to spread it to the unaffected. Barrels of filth were also left along the Savage Coast by an unknown party, helping the spread. The Savage Coast saw further invasion through a portal opened at the Overlook Motel. The breach allowed passage to and from a hell dimension, attracting various demons from the plane. Old enemies crawled up from beneath the earth. The Agab woke from their dormancy and were joined by other monstrosities. They resumed their attacks on the remaining Wabanaki. It wasn't long before the Illuminati, Templars, and Dragons sent their agents to assess Solomon Island and report to their factions. With the help of the Bees, the remaining survivors fight back against the madness and monsters that have overrun their home. If they cannot succeed, the Dreamer will wake, and the dream will be over.